Punctuate Your Research with Essent Biologics. I'm Tracy Nelson, Director of Partnerships with CBSA. We'd like to thank today's speakers and CBSA board members, Ethan Mann and Corey Stone, as well as the program sponsor, AlloSource. Now I would like to introduce Dr. Ethan Mann, CEO of Validus Therapeutics, to kick off the program. Thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Tracy. Thanks, everyone, for joining. I'm excited to be here. I'm Ethan Mann. I'm the CEO of Validus Cellular Therapeutics. We're a startup cell therapy company based here in Aurora, Colorado, focused on treating untreatable infections, those that are typically caused by antibiotic-resistant bacteria. And I'm excited to sort of moderate this session and have this conversation with Corey Stone, who is the executive director of Essent Biologics. Corey is responsible for creating, communicating, and implementing vision, mission, and overall direction. He leads the development and execution of the company's strategy, building a strong team to execute on goals and objectives. Corey has over 14 years of experience in the medical device and biotech industry, and has held several leadership positions, most recently as Senior Vice President of Innovation at AlloSource. And then prior to that, Corey was the Vice President of Marketing and Strategic Planning, as well as the head of Strategy and Corporate Development and Portfolio Planning. And before AlloSource, Corey was part of Terumo BCT's Strategic Marketing and Communication team. And you'll hear that Corey has a lot of background in working in biologics and tissue, a deep understanding, and we've been working together, Validus and Essent Biologics, here for now over a year in developing sort of our project. And so I'm excited to have this conversation today so that we can discuss and kind of bring to light some of the things that we've been successful at in transitioning the early stages of commercialization of really what has been a lab project into a product that's going to be a therapeutic. And so Corey's going to tell us a little bit more about that. So Corey, maybe it would be best if you started us off by kind of introducing Essent Biologics and the genesis of that company. And then and later on, we'll collect questions from the audience as well. And so I'm excited if anybody has questions that come to mind, just drop them into the chat, and then we'll bring those up with Corey kind of as we move along.
Yeah, hi Ethan. Hi everyone. Thanks for that kind introduction. Yeah, so the catalyst for Essent Biologics, we are a new venture out of AlloSource. AlloSource is one of the preeminent tissue banks in the nation that has been in business now for 27 years. They had their 25-year anniversary in 2019. The start of this organization comes off of the really deep understanding that AlloSource has in live tissue, and they've really developed this core competency around getting and recovering very viable tissue and cellular products from donated human materials through our member network. And one of them is Donor Alliance, who we partner with pretty deeply, and they're the local OPO for the Denver market. So you can see where the collaboration has really started. So AlloSource over the past 10 plus years has really developed this core competency in viable cellular products from donated human tissue, and out of that came the idea or concept in honoring that gift of donation a little bit differently, and really providing these cell products and scaffolds into the regenerative medicine space and cellular therapy space in both research as well as what we're calling GMP compliant products for clinical use. And then that's really what started Essent Biologics was to do that and provide that for these researchers and startup cell therapy organizations.
Yes, I think that's great. Obviously, we at Validus, we understand the value of that, but can you talk a little bit about how that research comes to be and the importance of, what that means to the whole organization, AlloSource, Essent, the gift of the donation, and how really developing that research with an eye towards that GMP compliant process is really what the focus of Essent is.
Yeah, absolutely. So, much like AlloSource, we're here to honor that gift of donation. So it really does start with the donor. And because of our relationship with AlloSource, we have a really, really strong connection to that donor as well. So when we talk about carrying, these researchers and clinical organizations from benchtop to bedside, we really mean that. So we can partner with these organizations and researchers from the idea or concept of what cell line they would want, what scaffolding they want from human tissue, and really partner to create that product that's required for them to get to the benchtop research all the way through clinical studies. Validus is a great example where, we've been in partnership with you guys now for over a year doing that, the core research, making sure that the cell lines are stable at a quality product, at a quality standard that will get you into the clinical trials that you're driving towards. And that's where we're seeing that there's this big niche in the market, is that there are people that have a lot of the research done, maybe have some animal models done, but really need that partner to help try to carry them through into human clinicals at a GMP compliant level.
Yeah, that's exciting. I think, that work is so meaningful to get that, really to, as we titled this conversation, to punctuate your research, right? To get it to that final stage where it's a translational product. So let's talk a little bit about that innovation process in regenerative medicine through cell therapy. What are the things that Essent's doing to really set that standard? I mean, people might not really understand that based here in the Front Range in Centennial, we have tremendous resource that is developing really a new standard for how to interact at the gene and cell therapy space. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, again, going back to the donor, a way that we saw value in this market was being able to connect a lot of the dots, right? So that's why we really talk about punctuating your research, and that we want to be able to provide all the pieces needed to kind of progress it at a different pace and ultimately get to those therapies for those patients quicker. And in doing that, we can provide things from the base data of that donated that donated biologic, all the way through to what we're calling the origin sample. So, being able to research not just the primary cell lines that are going to be used in the cell therapy, but also the tissue sample that goes along with it, is ultimately going to be able to drive that research at a different pace. And something that we're seeing in the market, and again, because of our connections with AlloSource and our AlloSource's member organizations, is the need to study that disease tissue as well. So when you look at our strategic plan, we want to get to the point where we're able to provide the disease tissue that's being researched, the healthy tissue that's going to drive the clinical trials, as well as all the data that can go along with it. So really what we see our value proposition is that we have the core competencies and ability to connect all of those dots at a custom level for organizations and researchers.
Yeah, I think that's exciting. I think that it brings to mind some of the work that we've done over the last year with Validus, and I'll just share, for everyone on the line, that this idea that you can take a lab concept that's, really maybe in a provisional patent filing status with a concept, but maybe, it's either on an immortalized cell line in the laboratory or early stage mouse studies or something like that. The proof of concept exists, but this idea of you really refining the mechanism or evaluating if it's going to happen in a primary cell line or fresh, donor tissue, or whether or not you're going to be able to scale appropriately. All these questions sort of have to be addressed really at that early stage of commercialization. When you go out and talk to investors about investing in a startup biopharmaceutical, they want to know, what's the translation, what's the tech transfer process look like? And it's really that can mean almost anything, but you need to be able to provide confidence for the founding team, for the investors, early stage, where you're really taking the end of that research, really early stage research stuff, and move it into a more sophisticated R&D process within a biopharmaceutical. However, a startup is unable to really go out and source those tissues. They don't have the refined protocols in place, let alone a CGMP process that they could leverage for the next stages, or go talk to the FDA about how they're going to really refine a product and get it into a clinical sample. And that's really where we've accelerated at Validus in working with Essent Biologics, is because we've been able to say, okay, our founder, Dr. Dow at Colorado State University, has an immense amount of data in animals and in laboratory studies and many different backgrounds, but hasn't really refined the cell line that we're interested in carrying forward as a commercialization step. so we began doing some of that work really on an experiment by experiment basis, but leveraging a lot of the existing data that Essent has at their ready, because it's employing, you know, the protocols for culturing cells. It's employing the protocols for really sophisticated media compositions and culturing methods, along with a myriad of outputs that allow for evaluation of the cells, of the product that wants to be made, of how that's becoming moving along. And so I think that process is really the valuable step for really maximizing the not only the commercialization process, but also the donation from the donor.
Yeah, absolutely, Ethan. I think that's a great example. And to expand on that, you know, part of because of the relationship with Allosaurus and the way that we can recover the tissue, you know, we believe that we're able to provide a more constant, stable incoming product for you guys, right? So that's part of the reason why partnering up front and building your release criteria together, we can define that early and be able to hit that every time. So you guys have confidence that when you go to the agencies or investors, that you know the product that's coming to you is exactly what you say it's going to do, right? And that's because of ultimately the ecosystem around AlloSource with Essent, and then ultimately the member organizations for AlloSource. So.
Yeah, that's terrific. I think, you know, I'm certainly excited and I'm really happy with the collaboration we've had thus far. If anyone on the line or anyone on Zoom here has any questions, be sure to enter those into chat, or if you want to come off mute and sort of interject or ask directly, we're happy to do that. This is a fairly informal format, as we've all gotten a little accustomed to Zoom now, but we're happy to take questions if anyone has anything pertinent. And then, you know, I'm happy to continue my line of questioning. I have several things that I'm happy to talk about. So one of the things that I've heard, you know, in some of the conversations with your team members is that I understand you're launching a production in June. Can you tell us a little bit more about kind of the products that are coming available, and maybe for both researchers or early stage startup or even more established companies, what kinds of things can we look at from Essent?
Yeah, absolutely. So we actually ran our first production line this month, so a little bit ahead of that June timeline, which was pretty exciting. But we do have additional products coming on, you know, in June, as well as second half of 2021. So the first one that came through was GMP compliant, so CGMP compliant adipose-derived mesenchymal stem cells. That was the first production run in May, where we will be launching a GMP compliant demineralized bone matrix at a particulate size that is really engineered for 3D bioprinting. So starting to combine some of these, you know, new advanced techniques and technologies for clinic that are currently being developed with all of the products, right? So people are seeding the ADMSCs with the DBM into the bio ink to start really starting to advance that forward. So we'll have that DBM later half of, you know, beginning in really June probably. And then we'll have some non-GMP. So we're calling those, you know, research use only products, and that's starting on the research side. So adult dermal fibroblasts are coming online. And then we'll also have another GMP product at the, you know, more Q3, Q4 for Wharton's jelly-derived mesenchymal stem cells. So a handful of non-GMP as well as a handful of GMP products coming online in 2021. And then we have, you know, again, because we really have access to the donor, we have a list of, you know, quite a few products that will be, you know, going in through 2021 all the way to 2024 that we're ultimately, you know, targeting. And that gets down to melanocytes, you know, resident immune cells, you know, ADMSCs, orange jelly MSCs with specific markers, all sorts of things that are really exciting and things that the market are asking us to be able to provide, both, you know, starting at a non-GMP product, so more of that research side, and then ultimately being able to carry that into a GMP product for clinical trials. So, you know, we're really partnering with people out in the market to drive that, which ones we prioritize, which ones have, market viability, which ones are for research only, which ones really need to be GMP'd because that's going to drive into a clinical trial. So it's a pretty complex process, but, ultimately we're driving towards a handful of products in 2021 and then rolling on to another handful in 2022.
Yeah, that's exciting. I mean, I put my scientist hat on, and I'm, intrigued by all of the cell lines and all the opportunities to look at research outputs that are really difficult to sort of query in the laboratory setting or even go into animals. It opens doors. I think I must imagine, not that you have to go into specifics, but I imagine you get into conversations with, either small companies or academic folks and introduce some of these ideas for products, and they're coming up with responses like, I've never seen like this, that something like this was available, or this allows us to ask research questions that we never thought we could ask.
100%. Yeah. And that's ultimate. And then, eventually we get to the question of, well, can you get this in the disease state? Right. And that's where it starts to get really, scientific and interesting there. And Reggie Stillwell, the, director of the AlloSource Innovation Center, always likes to comment that we start with the human, right? We start with human materials. So a lot of these organizations are, using animal models or animal material and then trying to drive towards human. Our goal here is to just start with that end product, which is the human-derived material, to really advance it forward and get to clinicals quicker. So,
yeah, I think it's exciting. I think that's the other thing, from a research perspective, and a guy who's had to write several grants, I think it's tremendous that you have both the research grade material that's available that you can work collaboratively, probably more economically, and then the idea that you can, if that really takes off, you can easily convert over to CGMP, which provides the structure, repeatability, reproducibility, and then the agency incorporation with the FDA for all the CGMP material. But I think having both of those sort of areas really allows that appropriate collaboration, because so many organizations out there that you try and go work with for material don't have that capability available, and then they don't have the research and the expertise to be able to really discuss what the material is and how to leverage that.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a partner right now who was able to get research use only cells, and that carried them to where they were ready to try to get into an IDE for human clinical study. And, they could not get a GMP compliant product for the specific cell line that they were going after. And that's where, we came in and we, authored some statements of work with them to get to the point where they will have their CGMP product for their human clinicals. And that's what is really exciting, is because we get to see the end goal as well, which is providing a intermediate part, if you will, for their ultimate therapy, which is, driving towards better outcomes for patients, which as a mission-driven organization is ultimately where we're at. So.
Yeah, I think that's exciting. I think, certainly I get a good experience with the culture at AlloSource and Essent, and the people that are there, and really the interaction with the community and the through the Colorado Bioscience Association has been tremendous. Can you talk a little bit about the culture you're building? And we had a question on the chat line. Do you have internships available? Do you have, what levels of, how many employees do you have at Essent? And what kind of the functional groups that Essent has? Because I know I've been on the phone with many people from Essent, from all levels. So talk a little bit about your structure, your culture, and what you're building.
Yeah. So, we're, as a startup, I think we're a pretty healthy team, right? So we are small but mighty. We have, as I go through the structure a little bit, you'll see that we are predominantly built on the R&D side as well as the production side. And now we're just starting to build our commercialization team to get these products out into more researchers and more companies. So, there's 15 of us. We're going to be at 17 pretty soon. As we see all these partnerships coming in, we saw the need to have a senior PM kind of manage it and make sure that we're meeting our, all of our customers' expectations. So we have a couple positions coming on in a couple months. But there's 15 of us. We have, 4 R&D headcount, going on 5 to 6. We do have interns coming this summer, and we're really excited. We have some really talented and energized individuals. One's from Duke, and then the other one's from UCLA. Both local high schools, though, so it's kind of exciting to kind of keep that ecosystem inside Colorado. And then we have, about 4 or 5 on the production side, and then 3 to 4 going into the quality and regulatory, and as well as quality engineering side. And we have, this is where it gets to where we're a little bit weaker, but we're starting to build, is the commercial side. So we hired our head of business development just about 4 or 5 months ago, and his name is Derek Mathers. And then we have our business systems architect, and that was a position that was prioritized pretty early, because we wanted to build the foundation really well. And so all of our systems and processes to be built early on for future, so we can grow and expand, and have our systems be able to carry us into the future. So he's on the the IT system side to build our base foundation for where we want to go. And then interns, like I said, we have 2 now, and hopefully we can carry that program forward and in other capacities as well. I think it's an exciting opportunity to get different eyes in, help them through their education process, as well as help us through very specific and identified projects in the summer times, and be able to keep moving things forward. So
yeah, it's great. I know I've been on the phone with several folks on the team that have helped kind of Validus think through different situations along the way. And a deep level of expertise from the field, where as we're writing documents that are going to go in front of the FDA, or documents that are going to go to kind of our strategy or our investors, we're getting the right questions asked from from the science team, from the commercialization side, from the quality team, regulatory support. All of that stuff is available as well. So we talked a little bit about the material, but the team at Essent really has a deep background of understanding of what the commercialization process looks like, really from that bench to bedside. And I think it's good to hear you have some interns available too, that participate on the team, because I know I've done that in the past too, even at a startup level. And I think anytime your team has to be able to teach and be responsible for what the strategy or what the execution looks like, they know it at a deeper level than maybe where they just have to be responsible for it in a team meeting or something like that. So I think it's tremendous to have interns around. They ask the simple questions that nobody asks. Why do we do it this way? And if you say, well, it's the way we've always done it, that's not necessarily an appropriate answer. There should be an understanding of why something is done a certain way. So I think that's terrific.
Yeah, absolutely. And because we're still, we are a new venture out of AlloSource, and they are really the ones that developed this, expertise in primary cell lines and viable cell lines coming from donated tissue. We partner with them immensely. So we're still very connected to the AlloSource Innovation Center. As opportunities or researchers reach out, there's always this question of, is this an AlloSource thing, or is this Essent a thing? So we're constantly in partnership and able to leverage that relationship pretty deeply, and really drive towards what's going to ultimately be the best outcome for both the donor as well as the patient that we're driving towards. So there's always that opportunity to continue to collaborate, and that's ultimately what we're driving for, is this collaboration around the ecosystem in Colorado, which is pretty vast right now and pretty exciting. So
yeah, no, I think it's really taking off in all areas of device and diagnostics and drugs and biotherapeutics. And I think that there's a lot of excitement there. Obviously, you and I know this. We're on the Colorado Bioscience board, and so we look to collaborate all along the way with all our other board members and the other everyone else in Colorado and really beyond. But I think being able to recruit talent back to Colorado because of the thriving biologic and bioscience ecosystem is tremendous, and I think that's exciting. I know. The collaborative nature of the Colorado bioscience community is important, and it's awesome to see Essent really taking that within their own organization and really leveraging that up. I know you guys have invested between Essent and AlloSource and really putting together some infrastructure though too. I mean, when you have a startup, I'll use Validus again as an example. putting a lot of investment into capital resources that are necessary for either research or that CGMP process is really challenging. And it's not really where investors want to put their early dollars. They want to put their early dollars into the clinical trial, maybe some preclinical work, but that clinical understanding of, hey, if you give this to people, how do they do? Do they, is it safe? Do we think it's going to be effective? They want to ask those sorts of questions. And so talk a little bit about your investment into the infrastructure, the resources you have, both on the culturing, on the acquisition, on the testing side, because those are hugely important for really that early stage commercialization process.
Yeah, so right now we do have our dedicated space at the AlloSource facility, the Essent Biologics suite, and we have about 1,300 square feet of Class 5 clean room space that's been built out specifically to allow for several production flows to happen at the same time. So we can accommodate a GMP run at the same time that we're, performing research space in one of the other clean rooms inside just the Essent suite. So we can accommodate each one. And then along the same lines, the reason I brought up, Sean as our business system architect is that we're developing the processes to accommodate that. So we have the controls along the way to be able to do that research, production flow as well as the GMP production flow without having any concerns that we're going to have contamination across the processes. So we've put a pretty large investment into the clean room space and just processes in general to accommodate any type of flow line that we're going to need for the first handful of years. It is obviously limited by space, as we keep rolling in new lines of product, we will have ultimately a space constraint, just sheer capacity of people flow. You can't have so many. So, we see ourselves in this space and comfortably in this space for the next year or two. And then we see that we're going to, need to make that next investment to be able to continue to accommodate, organizations like Validus, who are looking for that partner to be able to do their cell lines and be able to do that consistently for every customer that can, come through. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that idea of growing together with the industry and with the bioscience community in Colorado or beyond is important. So we had a question come in on the chat line. Do we have, you talked a little bit about the origin sample as part of the product. And there was a question about, can you talk a little bit more about that, the origin of the sample, where you're getting the cells from, and what that process looks like for Essent? I know so many people in the cell therapy space, and I experience this a lot because I'm out there giving presentations. And everyone's like, wait, you're using cells as a therapeutic. Where do these cells start from? How does it get from, a donated cell, especially in the allogenic sense, like what we're talking about, where it's with unrelated donors, to becoming a therapeutic? What does that process look like? And give us a little bit of an overview of that.
So we'll start with, kind of the process of donation down to a cell line. And then we'll talk about the origin sample, the Essent Biologics origin tissue sample. So the process from donation, so recovery all the way through to ourselves this is why I think the ecosystem that we have built is so important. Allosaurus as a 27-year tissue bank, and ultimately having, really 5 really strong member organizations, which are organ procurement organizations across the nation, providing that donated human material for us is important. So from recovery, the tissue banking recovery to ourselves is a pretty quick turnaround. So we get that tissue coming in on a pretty, expedited timeline for our process anyways. And ultimately what happens is it flows through AlloSource as the tissue bank, the AATB certified tissue bank, into our facilities through AlloSource. And then we're deriving those primary cell lines from, and the source here is really dependent upon what the customer is asking for. So as I mentioned earlier, we will have a handful of our own product lines like adipose-derived mesenchymal stem cells. So that's coming from, on block adipose material from donors, down to, adult dermal fibroblasts. So that's coming from full thickness skin donors from our agencies into Essent. And then we're driving that primary, that cell line out of that dermal tissue that's coming in. So, when someone comes to us and asks us for a very specific cell line, we can, leverage our relationships with AlloSource and the OPOs to get that tissue that's required to get that specific cell line. And that's why, we see it, access to that donor and access to consistent donors is really a value proposition out there, because we can then turn around to the customers looking for a cell line and tell them it's going to be consistent and it's going to have the same quality every time. And we can do the release criteria, and we have the donor records that we can make sure that the donors are being cleared through AlloSource's process, and everything is pretty buttoned up. And then once you have that, that cell line that's going into the therapeutic, we envision ourselves as being able to not just provide that cell line, but also being that contract manufacturing partner. So Ethan mentioned earlier the tech transfer. That's where Validus, tech transferred into Essent, their process, right? This is their IP. This is what makes their product special. And we're performing that activation step for them and able to provide a finished product on the back end, that finished biologic that will go into the clinical trial. So when you look at customers, we can go from just providing the cell lines to actually performing that activation step on that therapeutic for the customer. So, we see ourselves as pretty nimble and agile and able to kind of adapt to what the customer needs to just drive towards having that patient outcome.
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, I think you're talking about, almost 3 decades worth of experience and trust in what AlloSource is doing in procuring donated tissue, which is, really, we're responsible stewards of that donated tissue, and then being able to process that through into a usable therapeutic that is important for any donated organ, such that it can get to patients and improve outcomes of these patients who are experiencing really devastating, either infections or cancer or debilitating disease states that, really our cell therapies that we're beginning to see enter the marketplace are really changing these disease states that some people thought, were kind of unchangeable.
Right.
There are things that people were having to live with for a long time. And now we're bringing on cellular therapeutics, gene therapeutics that are changing how these patients, changing lifespans, changing the disease states for these patients. And it's really, being able to leverage those partnerships allows for, partners of Essent like Validus to be able to move through the commercialization process and bring something to market, really with the economics also that are critical for an early stage startup. Has to be able to conceive of economics where you have a therapeutic enter the marketplace and it's not going to be so absurdly expensive that it's not going to be used. And we're aware of that, but also Essent's being able to produce, adipose-derived cells, for example, as one of your early products that's, really in a batch process, but large batch processes, so that you have really a master cell bank that maintains that reproducibility. We're looking at, having years worth of cellular material produced, on a batch process. So that makes the economics for Validus very attractive. And that's something that really the market's overlooking right now a little bit, because there's this idea that, well, either the economics will come back or the automation will improve the processes, or, people will be willing to pay for these therapeutics when they enter the market. It's just very challenging because there's economic pressures from many directions. And I think having the ability to leverage donated tissue sources that can then be made into therapeutic cellular products is a huge value for Validus, and it's a huge value add that Essent brings to the marketplace.
Yeah, and then so the question on the origin sample. So the Essent origin sample is a flash frozen biopsy of where that cell line came from. So, for example, if it's the, dermal fibroblast, we'll take a piece of that full thickness skin recovered donor and flash freeze it and provide that as origin sample as well for, further testing and further research, just to, do further validation of where those cells are coming from for that researcher. And we got this as a request from, many survey researchers out there as an opportunity to really advance their research going forward and to provide confidence in the product coming in. So because they're getting that, they're able to do, their own genomic sequencing, they're able to look at the titers, they're able to look at what's going on, and they're able to make sure that what's coming into their process is, exactly what we say it is. but then also provides them confidence going forward as a partner with us. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think and then it's similar for Validus. I mean, we get really basically a cell banked material that we then enter into our protocol. And again, that's all happening at Essent, but we're using the protocol that we've, sort of dictated or, at this point, almost co-developed from early research. And that's really where we get the product. And I would imagine that, that process exists for both on the research side and the CGMP side for anyone out there that's looking to partner or access cellular material really from a trustworthy source with a spin on an innovation, being able to use donated tissue, which really gives a sustainable source of tissue that you could build a business and build a therapeutic around.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So Corey, can you talk a little bit more about where you're headed into the future? I know you mentioned you mapped out a little bit of your products and where you think those are headed. Talk a little bit about, the industries you're going to work in, gene, cell therapy, other areas. You mentioned some tissue, and what types of opportunities are on the horizon for Essent and the partners of Essent.
Yeah. So, we see our core products as, these biologic materials. So that's the cell lines, that's the bioscaffolding that's coming from, the donors. Interestingly, the future for Essent, I think, is going to be heavily on the services side. So we're finding a lot of these customers, these startup organizations, have the base idea, as Ethan mentioned. They have the science. They have, oftentimes their own patent or their own process. They've started to apply for that patent, but they don't have the resources required to get them to the next level. And so what we're seeing is a lot of organizations are coming to us and contracting a services model to where we're leveraging our expertise to drive them forward on a contractual basis. So, going into the future, we want to be that provider of, safe, quality, stable biological materials from human donated sources. But we also want to be the preeminent service provider and partner for these organizations to really help carry them into human clinicals and ultimately an approved product on the market to help patients. So you look at the timeline here, we're just now launching into production this year, our base products. We have a handful of partners on that services level. We want to get to that contract manufacturing organization for a couple of these in the next couple of years, and then hopefully expand on from that and be able to help more organizations get to more patients. So it's the product. It starts with the donor, and then it builds into our expertise and services into being able to provide it to these organizations. So
yeah, absolutely. I think it's tremendous to be able to leverage all that work that you're doing, really to put the master cell bank together and produce products that can then be turned into therapeutics with someone's protocol. And that's what we're interested in. That's what we've been developing, kind of together to get, a product out to patients. So we got connected a few, maybe over a year ago, I think is what we're saying now. The timeline's a little fuzzy because we were in some co-meetings together, but we got connected through some mutual friends with CSU, and right as Essent was really kind of starting up and going out on their own. How do people get in touch with you, get in touch with Essent? If they have a project in mind, it could be a researcher at an academic institution, it could be somebody with a business idea. How do they contact Essent Biologics to get, to talk about a project?
Yeah, absolutely. And we encourage all inquiries, really. So on our website at essentbiologics.org, you'll find what's called the research application. And that's a quick overview, as well as just giving us some idea of what type of tissue you're looking for, what type of cell line you're looking for. And that goes straight to, our commercial team as well as myself. And we, vet the idea because of our deep commitment to the donors. We want to make sure we're honoring that gift of donation, and it's going towards, really equitable and exciting new science for patients out there. So we want to honor that gift in the same way that AlloSource does. So we do want to vet him, but ultimately what that does is that just puts us into contact with each other. And most likely we're just going to have another follow-up call to really understand what's needed. And, it's kind of where the partnership starts, is just that first research request. If it's more on the commercial side and you're looking for a product, that can also be found on our website as well. We'll be launching the full e-commerce platform in the next couple months as well, so things can kind of just be handled digitally, which is another request for a lot of these researchers. There's a handful, and if you're in a university setting, you're just looking for cell products and cell lines, those will be available online, and those will be able to be handled through a transaction through e-commerce platforms. So we're trying to accommodate and facilitate the ease at which people can access the material while still maintaining the control to have the confidence that we're honoring that gift of donation in the right way.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, certainly important. And then I think, those early conversations oftentimes lead to refinement of ideas and
Absolutely.
being able to come up with the right, ability to work together, so you're not buying a product that's overly expensive on the research side, but you're also getting something that's trustworthy that is what you're looking for and going to respond in, whatever, whether it's an assay or a test or something like that. So I think that's appropriate that we went through that process as well. So, I would say, we're kind of getting towards the end of the hour now. And if there's any other questions or anything anybody has, drop them in the chat or come off mute and speak up. Corey, is there anything else that you want to cover? Any other questions that you get on a common basis, or things that we didn't touch on about Essent today?
Yeah. Honestly, the only one that we routinely get from a lot of these researchers or organizations is the recognition that these cell lines are coming out of donated human material. So the question always is viability. And that's why it's important to partner with us, because we're able to provide, the science behind the cell line, saying that these are healthy, viable cells, even though they came from a donated material. So it's a perception out there that I think we're always going to have to battle, but we have the science and the data behind it to kind of back what's going on. So.
Yeah, I think also you can lean on the success of AlloSource's process for getting tissue in and processed, and all the decades of work that AlloSource has been successful with. But then Essent jumping off of that, collecting the cellular material only makes sense because there's important cells in there that you can collect and leverage into therapeutics. So I think that's exciting. I think it certainly makes a lot of sense to be able to maximize that gift of donation, as you've mentioned, and be able to move that into a therapeutic that can help patients and improve lives. So that's terrific. Well, I appreciate the conversation today. I mean, I think it's always interesting to hear from folks that can help with the commercialization process. I'm a early stage, bench to commercialization junkie. So I'm like, I love going through the science and how do you commercialize it. That's sort of, what I love to do in the startup world. And there's so many folks out there that feel the same way, especially in the Colorado ecosystem and in the bioscience community within Colorado. I get into all sorts of conversations with folks all the time about interesting ideas and how to bring those to light. But everyone sort of sees, the academic research and an idea presented, and then people are familiar with the exits that splash in the news where there's a $1 billion exit, Pfizer buys this or that. But in between, there's a lot of years of work where you generate your overnight success through 7 or 8 years of work. And it's always, in the commercialization community, kind of a joke where, people are talking about this overnight success that took 8 or 10 years. And that's really the work that has to be put into refining protocols, going to FDA, generating that reproducibility. And that's what, it's exciting to have a partner like Essent in the Colorado ecosystem that's really going to help leverage that, 8 years of overnight success.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're excited to partner because, as I mentioned, we're in it to honor that gift of donation in new and unique ways. And we're kind of a natural child of AlloSource. So we're just kind of continuing that legacy and trying to get to patients in a different way. So.
Well, that's terrific. Well, I appreciated the conversation today. Hope everybody, maybe heard something interesting, heard something, that they want to follow up with. I'd encourage it, if that's the case, to reach out to Essent and respond. I think that we've covered a lot of material today. So
Yeah.
I know it's if you took notes or if you have follow-up questions, happy to reach out to me or Corey directly, and talk with Essent, schedule that conversation, see if they can help you with your research, help you punctuate your research. But if anybody has any last minute questions, now's the time to speak up, or I think we'll adjourn for the day and everyone can have a little bit of a bio break before whatever they have scheduled at 11. So I appreciate everybody joining.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the conversation, Ethan. I appreciate the facilitation, and ultimately, you guys are our first partner. So we just appreciate the partnership that we've built over the past, just over a year. So
yeah, likewise. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Thanks, Corey. Appreciate the conversation, and we'll be in touch.
thanks. Bye, everyone.
Bye.